Welcome back to another episode of the Be the CEO of Your Life and Business podcast. So this week's topic came out of some frustrations or things that I was dealing with earlier this week. And I realized in evaluating this topic and seeing if it would be a good fit for the podcast that I was able to free up my mindset. And you know how Laura and I love mindset work.
Just a little bit.
We love it. We feel like it is such a foundation to, business, being moms. You just have to have the right mindset. We always say that your mindset is everything. And so this week we want to talk about living your life in a cycle. So we've talked about fasting very recently on the podcast and how this fasting book came to us and it is cyclical in nature. It really aligns with a woman's cycle. And it was so fascinating to see how something could be applied in a cyclical nature and just make so much more sense to us. And especially once we started putting it in practice. Then there's also cycles that we talk about of busy seasons, right? These busy seasons when our kids are really invested in their sports, or we have a season of the summer where there might be a little bit more rest and relaxation and vacation, even though not for us this year. But it started to make me think about just things that happen in cycles in general. And I had listened to a podcast, I think it might have been Mel Robbins. She had a home organization expert on, and the woman had said that, you have to think of certain tasks in your home as cycles. And I'm like, it's really interesting because when you apply that to your home life, and this is the example I had earlier this week, my kids were out of the house with my husband at practice for cheerleading for Olivia, and then they had to go run some errands, and then they came back home, and I had cleaned everything. The kitchen was cleaned, dining room was clean, everything was away, everything was set for the next day, and the kids come home and they want to have a snack. And they go out to the dining room and they go and sit down, and I walk out there and the dining room is destroyed. It's trashed. The table's a mess. I had just finished cleaning it. And I looked at my husband and I was like, I just cleaned this table and now they've destroyed it. And I talked about this concept of cycles with him once before. And he was like, Amy, see, it's just a cycle. And it made me think more about work and our business in general, about applying these cycles to everything that you do and almost giving yourself permission to not feel like you are always behind because you look at it a different way. Instead of looking at it as, the table is dirty, I clean it and that task is done. Looking at it as a cycle of the table is dirty, I clean it, then it gets dirty again, and then I clean it, and then it gets dirty again, and I clean it. And it's a cycle. There is no beginning and end. There's no that's just over with, right?
And I think that's what stresses me out.
Right.
Is that it doesn't end.
No.
And the example you gave about the table is such a good example because it's one of the things that, and maybe I really have to work on this concept and changing my mindset about it, because I will straighten up the kitchen and 10 minutes later, it's trashed. And I'll say to Mike, I just spent all this time straightening everything up. Look, I walk back in here, there's wrappers everywhere.
Yeah.
Of course, they never throw their cups away. So there's cups all over the table and there's just stuff everywhere. Right. And I'll say I just feel like it's a never ending battle. And I think that's what stresses. I think maybe the cycle is what stresses me out. I have to change my mindset about it.
Right. It's a never ending cycle. It's not a battle, it's a cycle.
Right.
And the battle is in our brains because we feel like, oh, the kitchen should be clean and everybody should appreciate. If you really think that you're going to live in a house with kids that are under the age of, I don't know, even I take, for example, my husband, he's 37 and the house is a mess partially because of him. So it's it does not end, right?
Actually, side note, my hairdresser who now comes to my house to do my hair since COVID, last time she came, one of the last couple of times she came, she was like, your house is lived in.
Yes.
And that kind of changed how I thought about it a little bit. Yes, I love when the house is clean and neat. But it's lived in.
Yeah.
And so it's not going to be spotless. Well, it can't be
No.
all the time.
Right.
Right.
Exactly. And so that's a mindset shift though. And I think that's the point. That's why I wanted to talk about this topic, because it can also be relevant for our business. I know for me, just in this past week alone, in addition to my dining room table fiasco, I was working on motion papers until about Tuesday evening. And it takes a lot of mental energy to get really well prepared papers done and filed and just like finished. And so I walked out of here on Tuesday night, and I literally feel like between Tuesday night when I left here and then Wednesday morning when I came back in, it was like a blink of an eye. I felt like I hadn't even left, and the day starts all over again. And what I realized was there was like this hurdle that I couldn't get over. I'm like, oh my gosh, I just spent so much energy and time on this one set of papers. And then the next day I have to start expending all of this time all over again on the next project that I have, and the next thing, and the next contract review. It just felt like it was just constantly rolling. And I said to myself, there has to be a better way to think about this than in a like the start of your day, the end of your day kind of concept, and what you can get done in between. And maybe I should try to apply this cycle idea to what's happening with my work day and what happens with your projects too. So unless you have a different, kind of career or job that it's very, start and finish one task and then it's done and then you move on again, I don't think that there's really any job that doesn't feel this kind of sense of a cycle like what we do, where it's like you finish one set of papers, or you finish one closing, or you finish one, transaction, and then you start the next one, and it keeps rolling in that cycle.
I think though that's why I like the real estate,
Mm,
because it's a cycle of transactions, but each individual transaction is not a cycle. It's you have the transaction, you have somebody buying or selling, you go through the process, you
Yeah.
close, and that's it. And
right.
it's over.
Right.
And I think that's why I like that piece of our business so much, because there is an end point.
Mhm.
Like they will either close or they won't.
Right.
Either the deal falls apart or it doesn't. And so I think that's why I like that
That could
area
be.
of our practice so much.
We're having breakthroughs
Yeah.
here, right here on the podcast, folks.
Because
But
there is an
so
end
true.
point. And with litigation, with a lawsuit, yes, at some point there will be an end point, but that end point typically doesn't come for years.
Right.
So you have different cycles throughout the lawsuit, the
Yeah.
pleadings, the discovery, motions, like those are all different things that happen within the context of the case, but it's ongoing for what can feel like a lifetime.
Right. That's so true. I think that if you take it just one step up, like one level higher, you can realize too that your day itself, like your work day, if you look at it more or less like a cycle, it also supports our idea that like balance just doesn't exist. There is a cycle. So if you think of your work day or your day in general just as a big circle that comes back to another like point, right? A point of beginning, so to speak. Part of that circle is going to be work. Part of it's going to be rest. Part of it's going to be extracurriculars. Part of it's going to be, your committee's work, your volunteering, whatever. And then it starts all over the next day. A clock is round for a reason, right?
Ooh.
So, right. So like it goes and it keeps on going back around.
Like that.
So like that same day won't be repeated, but that same cycle could be repeated over and over.
It's a good way to look at your days, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because it's never going to be, I mean, we've talked about this a million times here, it's never going to be a 50-50 balance between work and home.
Yeah.
So some days your cycle is going to look like it's more about work. And for me, the weekdays, that is my cycle.
Right.
So most of my days are consumed by work. And then the evenings are, consumed by driving the kids all over the planet.
Mm-hmm.
So, my cycles during the week really mostly involve work. And then on the weekends, they usually don't involve work at all.
Right.
So the cycle changes on Saturday and Sunday, unless we have some emergency come up. But like that, I think that's a good way to look at it, instead of trying to look at it as some type of, quest to conquer balance. it's like, it's a cycle. There's an ebb and flow, and the cycle changes every day.
And I think I mean, it aligns too with our energy. And we've talked about that. Like as of last week's episode, we were talking about the 5 working geniuses. I know when my energy is the highest, just biologically during the day. And obviously, if I need to do things that might drain my energy, it might make more sense to do them during the cycle of the day where my energy is at the highest, because then I have the most to expend, and then leave those other, we did the assessment. So now I know what my energy, what my geniuses are. Leave those energy creating things to a point where maybe I have the lowest point of energy in my day, because I still love those things no matter what. Right? Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Like, so thinking about trying to plot and plan things on that basis as well.
And which is why we decided to change when we have our team meetings, because, and we both had the same thought, of course, which is always frightening. But we share a brain. So was it Monday that I came in and said that? I can't remember which day it was.
I think it was Tuesday. Yeah.
And I said to Amy, I said, we were talking about this concept of like, when do you have the most energy, and when should you do the activities that you really need to focus on?
Yeah.
And I said, I'm a morning person. So I have the most energy first thing in the morning when I get here. I usually get here at 8:30. And I try to, plow through the things that I know are just, I need to focus on. Can't always happen because every day doesn't look the same.
Right.
But, we really started thinking about when are our most productive hours of the day. And I said, do you think we should move our team meeting to an afternoon? You were like, oh my God.
I've been waiting for this day and this decision. I'm so excited.
Because typically, well, first we had them on Monday mornings, but then that started not to work because Alejandro's not here Mondays. So we decided to do Tuesdays. And it would be Tuesday morning, and I could sit and talk to everybody all day.
All day long. Yeah.
And when we do that on a Tuesday morning, it kind of eats up a lot of the morning. And then I get back to my desk and I'm like, oh my God, it's almost lunchtime. I've literally gotten nothing done today.
Yeah.
So we thought it would be a better use of our time to do that in the afternoon. So I think we'll move it to Thursday afternoons if we can. Look, the schedule's different every week. If we have a closing or court or something, we have to change it. Today we're recording on a Friday. We just happened to have our meeting this morning because we couldn't do it yesterday. And it just felt better to have it towards the end of the week.
Yes.
Because then we can forecast for the next week. And we don't have to take time in the beginning of the upcoming week.
Yes.
To do this.
Yep.
Right.
And because I also know too, and I think you agree, I have so much more energy at the beginning of the week.
I was just going to say, like, first else is new. At the end of the week, everybody's like running out of steam.
Yes.
So I think Thursday afternoon is like the perfect time to do it. But even if you think of our weeks as a cycle, right?
Yes.
So I know for me, in the beginning of the week is more like front loaded with, let me get focus work done. And then I get to Friday afternoon and I'm like, no, I'm done. Which is why.
Interesting. Do you think it could be because we front load our week so much?
Maybe. Actually, I don't know. I just tend to have more energy and focus when I head back into the work week from the weekend. I'm typically excited to be back at work.
Yes, that's true.
The weekends can be very stressful, even though I'm not working, just running the kids all over the place and stuff.
Right.
But I like the idea of front loading the week. So I don't know if I told you this. So I don't know if you saw today that I drafted a blog post.
Yes, I saw.
So I was like, you know what? I always love the concept of batch work. Who talks about it a lot?
Jenna Kutcher. Yep.
And so I was trying to think, okay, if I'm really batching work and I'm going to have my focus hours, the end of the week, unless I have something urgent going on, I typically do like lighter stuff, right? And for me, lighter stuff would be drafting blog posts, making the reels that we post on Tuesdays. So I figured, you know what? If I can on Fridays, I'm going to batch some of that stuff. I'll do every Friday. I'm going to try to do it. I'll do blog posts. I'll do reels, and I could just save them for future dates. Right.
Yeah.
But it's a better use of my cycle during the week.
Yes.
Because I don't have the energy on a Friday on afternoon that I would have on a Monday morning.
Right.
but there's still stuff I have to get done.
Yes.
I just have to leave the more administrative stuff, if I can, to later in the week.
Yeah. And I think that it's also a lot of trial and error here too, that creates the best systems. Because again, like all of the tips that we provide, we know that these aren't going to work universally. Not everybody is going to say, oh, I can do that for my work day, because maybe you also don't have as much control or autonomy over your work day.
Right.
But there can be things that you do that set yourself up for success a little bit better, as to taking this idea of a cycle and just start realizing that like you're also not doing a bad job where you are right now. If you can't ever feel like you're getting ahead, or if you feel like the tasks are always piling up, or like you finish one thing and then it gets, dirtied by your kids coming home and having a snack, like all of those things, if you start to break free from that mentality of that it has to be a definitive start and definitive end, and maybe it is more of the cycles in nature. It's like nature, using that word, it operates on a cycle. We have 4 seasons. We have different periods of growth, different periods of like, introversion, where we're like a little more to ourselves. I love these concepts so much. And I feel like being able to just try and adapt them to your struggles, and maybe just ask yourself those better questions of like, okay, what is this meaning? Why do I keep feeling this resistance? Is it because I'm not working in the best cycle of my day? Like, am I not setting myself up for success by leaving those high energy items for a period of the day when I don't feel so energized? And starting to really evaluate it, you start to shift your mindset away from the idea of like, I'm not doing enough, I can't get to it all, and saying, all right, well, maybe this was successful because I got this accomplished. And now we start anew today, and it's a brand new day, and let's tackle the next cycle.
And it's also important to get to know yourself.
And such a good point. Yes.
Because you can't look at the cycle until you figure out what works for you.
Right.
So until you know when you're the most productive, when you have the most energy, what things do you have to do during the day that have to get done first, or what doesn't matter? What can you push off till later? What feels best to you?
Yeah.
If you don't know that, it's hard to figure out what your cycle should be.
Yeah.
Like the only way that we were able to figure out like moving the meeting to later in the week was because we both know ourselves.
Yeah.
Right?
Like we both also, as intentionally as possible, move telephone calls to the afternoon.
100%.
And that's the other thing too, right? Like we live in a society where emails are urgent. Telephone calls are urgent. It's all alerting. It's blaring. You get messages constantly. But when you really stop and look at your calendar and say, okay, if I have six missed calls, they're each going to take about 15 minutes. That's only an hour and a half of your day. And that could land in the afternoon pretty squarely, even with a little buffer of, calls running over.
Yeah.
You don't have to rush to get those things done if they're not actually urgent and emergent issues.
And a lot of times I will close out of my email in the
Yes.
morning. I'll look at it when I first come in. And I do look at it first thing in the morning just because I need to know what I'm walking into.
Yeah.
And that's just my preference. Like that doesn't bother me.
And some
because it
people
makes
will
me
say,
feel better.
don't do it.
Right.
Don't get in your emails,
That's
because
what
then
you have to do what works for you.
Exactly.
Like, that for somebody else you don't look at your emails first thing in the morning, do you?
No, I look at them in the morning before I'm heading into work, but I already have like an idea of what I need to accomplish first thing before my energy is drained by all of those emails. But I won't like start responding to them. If anything, I will start putting them into like the subfolders I have.
Right.
Because then I go through all of them every single day.
Yeah. I look at them as part of my morning routine. Actually, like I will I don't respond to anybody, but I'll just quickly look to see what's there. But when I come here, I'll quickly look to see if there's anything that is actually urgent that I have to deal with right then. But if there's not, and I have something that I need to focus on, I just close out of my email. I'm like, I'll open it up in an hour.
Yeah.
And typically there's no fires in there.
Right. Right. And if there are, those are things that you can deal with. Those are higher priority things earlier on in the cycle. You need the energy to address them right away. Otherwise, they might be things that you're just that good, right? Give yourself like credit here. You might be just that good to be able to accomplish them even as your energy starts to dip. Like we were talking about the admin work and the blog posts and things like that. We love doing those things. It just is time consuming. And so if we're going to prioritize just the hierarchy of things that need to get done in our business, those things are important, but they're not necessarily urgent. So
Right.
they can sit in a bucket of, okay, a little bit lower energy later in the week, but maybe you get them done in the morning because it feels like energizing and momentum for the rest of your day. Who knows? But you have to like experiment. You have to figure out, like Laura said, what works best for you. Like you're gonna feel it too.
Yeah, you definitely,
Yeah.
when it's right and when it's not. But it's important to get to know yourself and, try thinking about, what in your life can you look at as a cycle to kind of take the pressure off of yourself.
Right. Oh, so good.
Yeah,
Yes.
because we put so much pressure on ourselves, like for the, cleaning the house, like keeping the house clean. It's like you're a horrible wife and mother if house isn't clean. That's how I feel.
Yeah.
And thinking about it that way, in terms of a cycle, how it's just like an ebb and flow. It's always going to be, clean, then it's going to be messy, and it's going to be clean, and it's going to be messy. And that's just the way it is.
Yep.
So if you can, look at the different areas of your life and see where it might be beneficial for you mentally to start looking at it, as a cycle, as opposed to something else, because there's never going to be balance in any area,
Sure.
of your life. So we hope these tips were helpful. We thank you for spending time with us, and we'll talk to you on the next episode.